So on your SOL test, there are several reporting categories. And so I did not design this PowerPoint, so I would like to not take credit for it. It's one of those things that I found from another Virginia teacher. Don't know their name, so I can't give them specific credit. But I thought it was organized well, so I'm going to use that to kind of discuss the topic of civics and economics. So we're talking about government. What kind of government systems did we see? And then what economic systems would we see in our early and all the civilizations that we're studying. All right, so when we think about, I kind of want to, even before we look at this, when we think about this slide, is that our earliest leaders thinking about those river valley civilizations, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus River Valley, China, they had, even in all the different ones who were living in the Fertile Crescent, one of the things they had in common was hereditary rulers, which would be where father to son was passing on the rule. And occasionally you might get a woman if there wasn't a son available, or say for in the case of in Egypt, Hatshepsut, who ruled until her stepson was old enough to rule. And so occasionally you would get a woman ruler, but in general it's men. So we call this a dynasty because all the ruling members are from the same family. You had the pharaohs in Egypt. In most places it's kings. You do have emperors when you do have a large area that they are ruling. Each of these early civilizations had rigid class systems. Slavery was very much a part of all of the world that we're talking about in this time period, from the beginning of history up until the 1500s. We're not going to see slavery end until the 19th century. The dynastic cycle that you see here below is often used to describe the Chinese dynasty system. And in essence, you would have a new emperor would come in. He would claim that he had the mandate of heaven, which was the authority to rule. It's very similar to the Middle Ages concept of divine right, that God had chosen the king to rule. And if God has chosen the king to rule, or in the case of China, where they have the mandate of heaven, the authority from heaven to rule, how can you as an average citizen question them? And that's really kind of the idea, that you can't question them, that questioning them might result in death. These people have what we call absolute power. Combine that with the Egyptian pharaohs, who the Egyptian pharaoh was seen not only as the king, the ruler, but he also was seen as God. And so they had a theocracy there. So back to the dynastic cycle in China, you get your new leader come in, set up, then things would start to go bad. Maybe they're ruling, maybe there's a natural disaster, something would happen, and then eventually a new ruler would come in and claim that he had the mandate of heaven, therefore he had the right to get rid of the ruler. The world's first organization was city-states, when we stopped kind of moving around and we start settling in, and they developed government, some type of leadership. And they developed centralized government and had some kind of religious authority, for the example, the pharaohs in Egypt. They had written codes of law, like the 10 Commandments for the Hebrews, the Code of Hammurabi, which is the first written code of law. Remember that the Code of Hammurabi is very strict. It's an eye for an eye, so a very strict punishment. People demand that laws be written down, like it takes a while. In Rome, they'll finally write them down in the 12 tables. We'll see the evolution of tools, which is how we define our ages. So, for example, the Paleolithic is the old Stone Age, but it's the development of agriculture that changes everything, where we stop moving around, we stop being nomads, and we live in the same spot. That's the Neolithic revolution. It's new agriculture. And once we have agriculture, we have better tools to allow for a surplus, to provide more than we need. Then people can become skilled in a craft. So maybe I'm a farmer, but I'd really just rather be a basket weaver, and I'm really good at that. So if my neighbor John is able to raise more crops, then he can sell me the wheat, and then I can spend my time making baskets. And this is how we get skilled labor, and we start to get artisans. In Greece, the citizens would be free adult males. Women didn't really leave the home. Women had much more freedom in Roman society. Now, if I was going to be a Greek woman, I would have wanted to be a Spartan woman, because Spartan women did have much more freedom than any other women in the Greek world. Citizens, free adult males who were Greek citizens, did have political rights. And in Athens, they were all expected to participate in government. Slaves, of course, had no rights. Women had no rights for the most part, and foreigners had very few, if any, political rights. Athens and Sparta are two city-states that we just have to compare. Athens will eventually become a democracy. Doesn't start off that way. Will become one. Sparta is an oligarchy, so it's a rule by a group, but they do have two kings. They have a very rigid social structure and military, more aggressive society. Remember that you had to fight for your food. They particularly didn't give you enough food to eat so that you would fight for what you needed. It is one of the only civilizations where women got the same amount of food as men because women were expected to raise strong, healthy boys. But we will see that democracy is a foundation of a lot of Western civilizations, specifically American government. When you think about the social structure in Rome, we're going to see patricians versus plebeians. The patricians were the upper class, the aristocrats always think about alphabetically, and that plebeians, L, that they're lower class, and they were the majority of the population. Almost always works like that. You think about a pyramid, that those at the top have the least population, but they have the most power. Eventually, some foreigners could become citizens in Rome, and they set up a republic because they were becoming larger. Not everyone could participate in government, so they elected people to rule for them. That's what the Senate did. And then there was the tribunal council for the tribunes, which came from the plebeian representatives. But the plebeians had to fight for that. Roman democracy, they did have a couple of branches of government, if you will. They had an assembly of tribunes, they had the Senate, and then they had the two councils who were elected. They could serve a small term as a dictator in a time of a crisis, which is how Julius Caesar becomes dictator. There was limits on their power, so this concept of checks and balances is an idea that we see in our country, the United States, today. The economic impact of the Pax Romana would be a time that they have amazing trade, and it was very safe to travel along the Roman roads. There was a saying that all roads led to Rome, and it provided a lot of stability. It's after the Pax Romana ends that we will see the cracks in the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire will fall. They will be invaded by lots of different people, the Visigoths, the Goths, eventually the Vandals, and in 476 they will fall. We will then see in the Middle Ages in Europe, we will see the feudal system develop. The feudal system will extend into Russia. They even had it in Japan. But in essence, you have a king who can't possibly deal with all his land. So he gives part of his land away to loyal lords. In response for getting that land, the Lord promises loyalty to the king will provide military service. This is an exchange of loyalty for service. The Lord then has his land. So Lord DeLong has the land. I need people to work the land. There are people who need protection, specifically from that group, the Vikings, who are coming in and attacking all the time. So what I would do then is I would find peasants who are willing to work my land. In exchange for them working my land, they're going to give me part of what they grow, and I will protect them. So again, it's this exchange of services for loyalty, this feudal obligations. So feudalism is the political system, and then manorialism, how it actually worked, is the economic system. Manors were self-sufficient. They had everything they needed on them. They could produce anything that they possibly needed. Feudalism will eventually end, and that will lead us into the Renaissance. And we'll see lots of goods traded, trade networks. Some important ones that you need to remember are the Silk Road, which came from China, trading silk and porcelain and tea and gunpowder. And then the Trans-Saharan trade route, which went across the Sahara Desert in Africa, and they would be trading gold and salt. We have spices from the Indian Ocean, and eventually we're going to find a shorter way to get there. That's the whole idea with Christopher Columbus. Technology, paper, which they've been using papyrus before. The Egyptians had invented paper from trees, will come through China, all through the Muslim world. We're going to get most of the things that we're trading through the Muslims, which is why we call Arabic numerals, even though they were invented by India. And Arabic numerals are the numbers that we use. We'll get some new crops, and we'll learn a lot, because while the Middle Ages is happening in Europe, that intellectual kind of light is turned off because we call it the Dark Ages. Asia is flourishing. So the water wheel, the windmill, the lateen sail, the triangular sail is much more effective. This will be very big for exploration, as will the compass. We'll also get the astrolabe, some other things you'll talk about in world history too. We also see cultural diffusion, the spread of culture that happens through trade. For example, Buddhism going to China, to Korea, and then to Japan. Islam spreading across Africa. The Crusades, which are a horrific, horrible thing, fighting for control of Jerusalem, the one big economic impact they have is they have this increased demand for all these amazing products and goods that the Crusaders saw in the Middle East when they were there. Like, we want these. And so it's going to stimulate trade. And it eventually will lead to what we will see with the Renaissance. We're going to start to see bankers and merchants evolving because we are using money now. We stop bartering. The Lydians, remember, were the first to use a coin system, but it's not something that average people are using. But the idea of needing credit and banking is something that's going to develop during this time period as well. And because of that, we'll start to see the Renaissance will begin in Italy because they are more financially stable. They didn't have the feudal system. They're such a center of that trade. And people will begin to have extra money, and they can use that as patrons to support the arts. And one other book we think about for government, Machiavelli's The Prince, which is one of our Renaissance writers, an Italian writer, and it is a treatise or an essay on government. And just like Plato's The Republic, he was Greek. He wrote all about different types of government, which ones he thought was best. He wasn't a big fan of democracy because he'd seen Socrates killed as a result of the Athenian government. Athenian governments were afraid that Socrates was corrupting the youth of Athens. Machiavelli basically tells how to get and gain power, how to be an absolute monarch. He says it's better to be feared than loved. And the key things he says is that the end justifies the means. Do whatever you have to get to the end goal. And that it's okay to do evil when necessary. You should try to do good, but it's okay to do evil when necessary. Historians debate whether or not Machiavelli was writing this as a truth or is it more satire. But one thing that we do agree on is that this is how many people were gaining power during this time period. And so that covers our kind of government, civics, economics reporting. So just a little bit kind of a good information to review that you need to know for your SOL.